Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nitai Gaura Premanand.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagwatam, Canto number 4, chapter 14, the story of King Vena, text number 15. Dharma Charita Punsam.
Acharita Punsam.
Dharma Charita Punsam.
Dharma Acharita Punsam.
Vanmana Kaya Buddhi.
Vangmana Kaya Buddhi.
Vanmana Kaya Buddhi.
Vangmana Kaya Buddhi.
Lokan Vishokan Vitarkya.
Lokan Vishokamantirata.
Lokan Vishokan Vitarkya.
Lokan Vishokamantirata.
Atarantya Sanginam.
Atrantanantam.
Atarantya Sanginam. Dharma Acharita Punsam. Vanmana Kaya Buddhi. Lokan Vishokan Vitarkya.
Lokan Vishokavinta.
Atarantya Sanginam.
Athantaram Asangitam. Dharmacharita Punsam. Mangamanya Kaya Buddhi. Lokan Vishokaranta. Atonantyam Asanginam.
Dharma, religious principles. Acharita, executed.
Execute.
Punsam,
Punsam.
two persons.
Persons.
Vak,
Vak.
by words.
By words.
Mana,
Mana.
mind.
Mind.
Kaya,
Kaya.
body.
Body.
Buddhi,
Buddhi.
and by intelligence.
And by intelligence.
Lokan,
Lokan.
the planets.
The planets.
Vishokan,
Vishokan.
without misery. Vitarati,
Vitarati.
bestow.
Visto.
Atha,
Atha.
certainly.
Certain.
Anantya,
Anantyam.
unlimited happiness, liberation. Unlimited happiness, liberation.
Liberation.
Asanginam,
Asanginam.
to those free from material influence. Translation by Divine Grace. Those who live according to religious principles and who follow them by words, mind, body, and intelligence are elevated to the heavenly kingdom, which is devoid of all miseries. Being thus rid of the material influence, they achieve unlimited happiness in life. Purport of Divine Grace. The saintly sages herein instruct that the king or head of government should set an example of living a religious life. Religion means worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should not simply make a show of religious life, but should perform devotional service perfectly with words, mind, body, and good intelligence. By doing so, not only will the king or government head rid himself of the contamination of the material modes of nature, but the general public will also, and they will all become gradually elevated to the kingdom of God and go back home, back to Godhead. The instructions given herein serve as a summary of how the head of government should execute his ruling power and thus attain happiness, not only in this life, but also in the life after death. Om Jana Timaranda Shajananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Meditavanya Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manogistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Derati Swab Prantikam. So the sages have, up to now, they have gotten together and they have plotted amongst themselves. We say plot, but actually that word is not used, can be seen as a plot, because they want to do something with the king, and they're not telling him about it. So they're planning. Plotting, we can say, but planning is perhaps a better word. They put their heads together, and they realize that a mistake has been made. Now, they're not admitting to the mistake, at least not here, that they made the mistake. But they do realize that a mistake has been made. And so what they want to do at this time, they want to change the king. They have that in mind. He's been not just naughty or bad behavior, but his behavior has been atrocious. Actually, in modern day terms, we would say that he is a raging psychopath. A raging psychopath. He kills young children, he goes into the woods, he kills the animals. It doesn't say that he eats them, but the intimation is there that he's probably eating them. But the villagers are afraid of him. They hide from him, even as a young child when they see him coming. So, given all this behavior, still the sages saw fit to elevate him to the platform of being king. So it calls into question the judgment of the sages, but we can even let that go. Still, we're confronted with that right now. The sages now, and the saintly sages have made another judgment, and they're going to act on that judgment. And what I'd like to consider today is that judgment itself. They're going to consult with the king. They're going to help him get better, to be a better person. And I'd like to cover some of the pros and cons. Is this going to be effective? Is this going to happen? Are they going to be successful in their program, their plot to make the king a better person so they can leave him on the throne? So we're beginning here with the instructions of how the head of government is to lead a religious life. Now, those instructions are applicable to someone who two things are there: his behavior and his birth. And his birth was not a high birth. It was, one side it was high, but also in the Shastra, here early on in the previous couple of verses, Srila Prabhupada explains the karma, the bodily makeup of the child favors the mother. And we know it's also been explained that the mother was not highborn. She was her father was the king of death, and it can understand that karmically, King Vena takes after his mother's side, and he's exhibiting those characteristics. Now the sages, they want to change him because they want to keep him on the throne. They have a dilemma. The king is going around, charging around with his chariot around the world. He's causing havoc. People are very frightened. He's not he's told them they can't offer sacrifice, and the basis of Vedic civilization, the four varnas and four ashramas, the very basis of that civilization is that one offers sacrifice to Vishnu. In creation, the Lord sent forth generations of men and demigods and sacrificed for Vishnu. And by this sacrifice, you'll be happy. And so King Vena now is outlawing sacrifice. So there's trouble in society. What the king must do in order to become a better person, he must do as we're also instructed. We have to let the higher self control the lower self. Is motivated by lust. He has a bloodlust, we see. He kills young children, even at a young age. He kills the animals. He's puffed up with his own power. So you can see by this activity that he's entirely on the bodily plane, and he's acting in a lusty way, just to satisfy his own lust. He's doing all of these things. In Bhagavad Gita, the 3rd chapter, text number 43, it says, Evam buddhi param buddva samstabhyat manam atmana jahi satram manho baho kama rupam durashabhan. The translation, thus knowing oneself to be transcendental to material senses, mind and intelligence, one should control the lower self by the higher self, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So, what the sages, in effect, will have to do, if they're going to be successful, is they convince the king to let the higher self control the lower self. And again, we're just looking at chances of success for these instructions. The sages are going to go at the king with this in mind. And what are their chances for success? We can tell, we can analyze and pretty much tell what's going to happen. Now, the first thing is that let the higher self control the lower self. Well, what is the higher self? Oneself is the higher self. And let me go back over this verse again. Thus knowing oneself to be transcendental to material senses, mind and intelligence, one should control that. The higher self is oneself. And what is oneself? It is the spirit soul. So in other words, for this instruction of this verse to take place, one must understand who oneself is. And oneself is the soul. So actually, one has to understand the body, but he has the soul inside. And the body is composed of the material elements, earth, air, fire, water, mind, intelligence, and false ego. And so the higher self must control these elements. Now, King Vena isn't even on the platform of understanding that he's not the body. He's thinking he's the body. So from the get-go, from the very beginning, we can know that the sages, their chances of success are very, very small to get him to understand that he has to change himself, who he is. So the king thinks himself to be the body. And in order to change, he has to do the same thing that we have to do. Now understand that we have to surrender to the spiritual man. Now what is this business of change? We can elevate ourselves, we can get an education, we can go to the university. Back in the United States, years ago, not so popular now, but years ago, 10, 20, 30 years ago, there were self-help programs. There were self-help gurus. They were very popular. And I myself had some of those because I was doing business and I wanted to be a better business person. I wanted to make more money, provide for my family nicely. And so I read several, the best of these teachers that were teaching one how to elevate oneself, how to organize one's life better, how to speak to people a little nicer, how to make a sale properly. And so I was reading and studying these. And in this way, with the power of positive thinking, they would say that you can elevate yourself. Well, in effect, it's true. You can. We are Ishwara. We are Ishwara. Krishna is Parameshwara, the supreme controller. but we are also Ishvara. We can control. I can move this book from here to here. I can choose to come here and sit in this privileged place. This is privileged place, and you can choose to sit here. So we can make these choices. One can choose to go to the university and study and learn more. So one can, in fact, choose to elevate themselves. But what is the nature of this elevation, this change that we're affecting? It's like we're on a boat, a big boat, and we're crossing the material ocean. We're in the middle of the ocean, just to use the analogy that we've been taught often. We're on the boat. Now, as yet, we haven't taken a spiritual master. We haven't gotten on the spiritual master's boat, but we're on a boat in the middle of the material ocean. And so, in effect, we can change our position. It's still taking us where it wants to go. We're still the victims of our karma. In Sankhya philosophy, we understand, we're taught and shown very, very clearly how, as a result of our past activities, our past life, and our desires, we're given a certain body. It's constructed in a certain way. We have a certain mind, a certain kind of intelligence. We are filled with desire. And then we are born into a milieu, it's called, an environment of associates. They're around us in a certain place at a certain time, in a certain country. We have certain relatives and friends or associates that are there that are also in a big adjustment and change the direction that we want to go. We want to go into samsara, we want to continue. We either stay in karma, go back home. And if we want to go back home, we have to, the changes are so small as to be meaningless. So the sages, they're getting ready to go, and with the idea in mind that they're going to propose to him programs, ways of behavior. We don't know yet. We haven't read that far. We want to see as time goes on. But from the beginning, we can understand what they need to change the king. And what they need to change the king is that he has to either find one, two, some or all of those sages, and they have to be one or two, or all of them have to be qualified to be maybe not initiating guru, but at least instructing guru. And they have to, and he has to, what? He has to surrender. He has to accept them as his guru. He has to accept them. And if he doesn't, and if they're not qualified, then no matter how much and how nicely they talk, they're not going to change him. The same thing with us. We know so many things. We've been taught so many things from Master. And know how much we talk, we can't change anyone unless we can give them some small idea of the spiritual master and of Krishna. And if they get some appreciation for the spiritual master, then they can begin to change. But they have to ultimately surrender unto the spiritual master. And if they don't do that, if they can't cut free from their wanting to hold on to the material nature, if they can't let that go, at least a little bit, then there's no hope. They can't change him. And the same with King Vena. So King Vena and you and I, we're all in the same position. If we want to change, we can change, but we have to surrender to the spiritual master. That's meaningful change, not little changes. Little changes, yes, we can do, but meaningful changes, we can't do. And so what's being asked of the king here, what's being suggested by the sages, is they want meaningful change from him. So it just seems, just by initial analysis, that their chances of success are very small, very small. In society, we can see, we can't see right now, except from the pages of Shastra. We can see in the pages of Shastra how saintly king can order society and be very simple, can be happy. But practically around us, we can't see that. because we don't have that anymore. We don't have anyone. And Srila Prabhupada says in the purport here that it isn't necessarily a king, but a leader of society. He gives some, okay, if you want to have a democracy, if you want to elect your leaders, then let's talk about leaders of society. It doesn't have to be king. So he's willing to give some leeway. Now, in my experience, in my country, the United States, we have certain situations that I can describe to you a little bit that kind of indicates how not only is the citizen a victim, so to speak, a tool of his karma and his desires. He's moved according to that by getting the body and the environment given to him by Lord Yamaraj. So he's programmed to go in that direction. Not only is the citizen controlled by that, but the country, the leaders of society, they have their idea and they have their karma. And they're moving the nation, the country, a little bit. Again, their control is almost like they're very powerful. They have planes and ships and atomic weapons. So it seems like they're very powerful, but they're not so powerful. And together, they got complexes, military complex, industrial complex, groups of people. They move the nation in certain directions. So they have their karma. And the people also have their karma. And their karma is to belong to people with this karma. So together, they're moving en masse in one direction. And in my country, early on, 200 or 300 years ago, your country has a history of 5,000, 10,000, thousands of years. So my country has a history of a couple of hundred years, 300, 400, 500 years. We know that much, 500 years back, 200 or 300 maybe. 500, we don't know much. But so it has its little history. But in that little history, we can see things that have happened by leaders who are totally aggrandizing. They're like King Vena. They're evil. They want to control, and they don't care who they hurt, who they kill. In the United States, when the people first came in the 1600s, late 1500s, early 1600s, they came from England and began to settle the country. The Indian was there. They called them Indians because they thought went to India. They thought they had come here, but they didn't come here. So they called the brown people, they called them Indians. And so they made friends with the Indians, but mostly the Indians didn't want any part of them. And they killed them. There was warfare back and forth. So as time went on, the white people became bigger and more powerful. They had more and more white people came from Europe. And they began to crowd out the Indians more and more and make warfare on them. And there's so many things that happened that the white people did to the Indians. First of all, the Indians were pretty fierce. And so they exacted a toll. The white people would come. And the Indians were very good fighters. They had primitive weapons, but they were good fighters. So there was a lot of bloodshed that went on. But still, the sheer mass of the white people coming from Europe the Indians couldn't hold out, and so they were pushed back farther and farther and farther. And when they would make those peace and treaties were broken. The white man would promise something, okay, you can have that, you can have this land, but then they would break that and they push the Indian farther and farther back. So we have today the Indian, who was once a very proud person and had all of the land. Now we go there and we see that they've only got the worst part of the land. They've got the deserts, unproductive land, and they're treated very badly. And they alcoholics, and they're just they're in small spots. So they've been treated very badly. I'm just to name one. There's so many atrocities. Atrocities means very bad behavior, killing behavior on the part of the white man against the Indian. One of those atrocities were that the Indian, they had put them in a very small, they call them reservation, a reserved area. They pushed them into the reservation, and they were starving, and it was winter, their winter, ice and snow, and below zero. And they had pushed them into a very small reservation, and so they gave them blankets, but the blankets they gave them were infected with disease, the plague. And the blankets, and this is in history, it's true, the blankets killed the rest of the Indians that were in the reservation. They died from these blankets, these infected blankets. So we see that this karma is being created for the nation whole by the leaders. It's what the sages here want to get away from, not exactly that kind of behavior, but similar behavior. They want to get away from this evil behavior that King Vena is instructing, is carrying on. When the king or when the leader of society become part of that, they take on that karma also. So it's like the leaders of society behave in this way, and there's a fallout because the citizens become part of it. And everything, all of the bad karma that the leaders create becomes into the lap isn't too. So they not only have their bad karma that they've created, but they also getting the bad karma created by the leaders of society. So the kings, the sages, they foresee catastrophe coming. So they want to change the king. They want to consult with him. And just the same way that the citizens, present-day citizens, want to gain. They want to gain some improvement by listening to a person who is not concerned with religious practice. They want to gain some improvement. So the sages are hoping to give some improvement to the king if he just listens to them. But we know from the beginning that they're not going to change the king unless they can deliver to him a spiritual master, and unless the king can accept that spiritual master. Otherwise, the chances of the king changing are very, very small. Even if he listens nicely to them and says, oh yes, this is a good idea, that's a good idea, and he listens very patiently and nicely, and he actually makes a program, oh yes, I'm going to change. Well, some little change may be there, but no big change, no important change, unless in that group of sages there is a spiritual master, and unless he accepts the spiritual master. So we'll have to see how the story progresses. We'll have to see if indeed he may give some lip service. We don't know. We speculate now. This may happen, that may happen. We have a little room we can try to understand. But if he doesn't accept, then there's no hope. Now, the last sentence of the purport is gives indication of what the Bhagavad Gita asks of us. And I'll read the last sentence of the purport again. The instructions given herein serve as a summary of how the head of government should execute his ruling power and thus attain happiness, not only in this life, but also in the life after